Have you ever wondered what could happen when a millionaire meets four lost souls? The air was heavy with the scent of sun-warmed pavement and sugar drifting from the nearby bakery. It was the kind of summer day that seemed to pause time, hot, golden, and strangely still. Hugh Lawson, dressed immaculately in a light blue suit, had just left a business meeting. As the CEO of one of the most powerful construction companies in the state, he was used to walking with purpose, never glancing to either side. But that day, something made him slow down. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was instinct. But as he turned the corner near the bakery, he saw a sight that rooted him to the sidewalk. On a wooden bench just outside the shop, beneath the soft shade of an old tree, sat four little girls. At first glance, he thought they were sisters, or maybe even identical quadruplets. All four had soft blonde curls that bounced around their shoulders, pale skin kissed pink by the sun, and strikingly blue eyes. Two of them wore simple but lovely pink dresses, the other two in matching light blue. All of them had on the same small festive birthday hats, as if they had tried to bring a celebration into the world with sheer will. In front of them, resting carefully in the hands of one girl, was a single cupcake with a lone candle stuck in the center. They weren't laughing. They weren't smiling. They sat quietly, their legs swinging just slightly above the ground. There were no balloons, no gifts, no adults nearby. Just the four of them and the cupcake melting slightly in the summer heat. Hugh paused. Something in the scene gripped him. These weren't kids begging for attention or playing pretend. They were too still, too serious. Against all his natural instinct to keep moving, to stay on schedule, he walked over slowly. His shadow stretched long across the pavement until it touched the edge of the bench. The girls looked up at him, not startled, not afraid, just curious. Before he could open his mouth to ask if they were okay, the smallest one holding the cupcake spoke with heartbreaking simplicity. "It's our birthday," she said. "But we don't have a family." The sentence hit him like a stone in the chest. There was no self-pity in her voice. No performance, just fact. The truth offered plainly, like a child would say, "The sky is blue." He swallowed hard. He had no idea what to say. In meetings, he always had the right words. But here, facing four tiny girls in party hats, he was mute. He sat down slowly on the edge of the bench, careful not to invade their space. For a moment, there was just silence between them, broken only by the hum of summer insects and the distant laughter of strangers who hadn't seen what he had. After what felt like forever, but was really only a minute, he finally looked at the girl who had spoken and said quietly, "I'm sorry." Another pause followed. Then something happened. He didn't plan it. He didn't rehearse it. He just said it. "I can be your family." And the girls, though they didn't understand how or what that meant yet, didn't question him. They didn't flinch or run or even look surprised. Instead, they each turned their eyes toward him, soft, unsure, but open. It was as if somewhere deep inside, even after all they had lost, they still held space for hope. And Hugh, for the first time in years, felt something shift in his world. Something that had long been locked away had opened. He had come to the bakery district to close a real estate deal. But he had just stumbled into something much more important. Can you imagine the journey that awaited him next on Millionaire in Love? He didn't know how yet. He didn't know what it would take. But he knew he was not going to walk away. The hours that followed were a blur for Hugh. But something in him remained completely focused. He couldn't shake the image of the four girls sitting so still with that one cupcake, as if the world had forgotten them entirely. After leaving the bakery, he returned to his office. But instead of heading into meetings or reviewing contracts, he walked into his private conference room, shut the door, and called the city's child services department. He didn't have a plan, didn't have legal vocabulary ready. He just knew he had to do something. The voice on the other end of the line was professional, cautious. They told him the girls were in temporary placement at a state-run group home. Their names were Ellie, Grace, Lily, and Mia. Sisters, identical quadruplets, recently admitted. Their mother had passed away earlier that year from an aggressive illness. No father had been named on the birth certificates. No extended family had come forward. They were wards of the state, awaiting long-term placement, though the chances of them being adopted together were, in the words of the caseworker, unlikely at best. That phrase, unlikely at best, echoed in Hugh's ears. The thought of those girls being separated, scattered into different homes or foster care systems, made his chest tighten. He thanked the worker, got their full names, and asked for an appointment to meet with whoever was responsible for their file. Less than 24 hours later, Hugh sat in the drab office of Family and Child Services, dressed not in a suit, but in a plain shirt and jacket, as if trying to show that he wasn't there as a CEO, but as a man. The social worker was polite, slightly skeptical. They were used to people getting emotional, making big promises, and then backing out when faced with the weight of the legal and emotional realities. Hugh listened carefully as the worker explained the situation in detail. The girls had been through 3 temporary homes since their mother passed. One foster family couldn't handle all 4 and requested separation. Another reported the girls had attachment issues and severe night terrors. In each place, the girls had refused to sleep in separate rooms, refused to let go of each other's hands. They clung to each other like life rafts in the middle of a storm, and the world kept trying to pull them apart. "I'm not looking to make a gesture," Hugh said, his voice steady. "I'm looking to make a home for all of them together." The caseworker studied him for a long time before asking the inevitable questions. Why now? Why them? What experience did he have with children? With trauma, with parenting at all? Hugh answered honestly. He had none. He had no children of his own, no past marriage, no history of fostering. But he told them about that moment on the bench, how something in him cracked wide open. He told them that for the first time in his life, he wasn't motivated by profit or achievement or control. He was simply moved by 4 little girls who looked like they'd been waiting their entire lives for someone to choose them. Legally, of course, he couldn't take them home overnight. The process would be long: background checks, home evaluations, supervised visits, psychological interviews. There were policies, timelines, and red tape. But the agency agreed to begin initial evaluations. They told him not to expect fast results. Hugh didn't care. He was in it for the long haul. Over the next week, he transformed a wing of his house into a warm, welcoming space. He didn't hire an interior designer. He went to the furniture store himself. He spent hours choosing beds and curtains, pillows and bookshelves. He bought storybooks, puzzles, stuffed animals, matching pajamas. He stood in the middle of the freshly painted lavender room and imagined laughter bouncing off the walls. His assistants didn't understand what was happening. His board members were puzzled by his absence from strategy calls. But Hugh had discovered something more important than expansion and shareholder reports. He had found meaning and he wasn't letting it go. When the girls were brought to visit his home for the first time, they walked in hesitantly, holding hands as always. They wandered from room to room like they didn't quite believe it was real. Mia, the smallest, stood in front of the large window in the playroom and whispered, "It's so bright here." Lily picked up a plush fox and cradled it. Grace climbed onto one of the beds and bounced gently. Ellie, ever the cautious one, turned to Hugh and asked, "Are we allowed to stay here?" He knelt down, eye level with her, and said, "You are allowed to stay as long as you want." It wasn't a fairy tale. There were still evaluations ahead, more papers to sign, many questions still unanswered. But that day, something irreversible happened. The girls began to believe, not fully, not yet, but just enough that maybe this time someone meant it. Maybe this time they wouldn't have to say goodbye. The transition from temporary visits to living under one roof was both beautiful and difficult. Hugh had never been responsible for anyone but himself, and now he found his life revolving around bedtime routines, mealtime negotiations, and quiet sobbing behind closed doors. The girls officially moved into his home under foster placement status, still waiting for the courts to finalize the adoption process. And although the legal system warned Hugh that the adjustment could take months, he felt the shift immediately. His house, once a place of silence and polished emptiness, now pulsed with footsteps, laughter, crying, and questions shouted down the hall. Mornings were the hardest. The girls still woke up disoriented, unsure of where they were. At first, they refused to sleep in their own beds, insisting on piling into one. Hugh let them. He brought in more blankets and stuffed animals and even lay on the floor nearby some nights when the nightmares returned. They had them often. Each girl handled her fear differently. Grace would scream and then apologize. Ellie would go completely silent. Lily clung to her pillow and rocked. And Mia, the smallest, would cry without making a sound. Hugh stopped counting how many times he was jolted awake at 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of one of them calling for him. He never ignored it. During the day, he did everything he could to create a sense of routine. He had rearranged his work schedule entirely, cutting down on travel and meetings, moving conference calls to early mornings or late evenings so that he could be there when the girls woke up and went to sleep. He hired a child psychologist, not to take over, but to guide him. They created visual schedules, a morning routine chart with stickers, and a nighttime ritual with the same 3 steps: bath, story, song. Hugh learned to read bedtime books with emotion, how to sing softly, even when he felt ridiculous doing it, and how to braid hair with reasonably successful results. But it wasn't just the logistics that were challenging. It was the emotional toll. The girls, though small and sweet, carried grief in ways that didn't always make sense to adults. One afternoon, Hugh found Mia sitting in the laundry room, curled up beside a basket of clean clothes. When he asked her why, she said she liked the smell. It reminded her of their mother's house. He sat on the floor next to her and didn't say a word. Another time, Ellie became furious because Grace had accidentally torn the corner of a picture she had drawn. She screamed, threw it across the room, and shouted that Grace was trying to erase her. Later, in tears, she confessed she had dreamed about her mom and thought the picture would bring her back. Hugh hugged her and told her that love wasn't in paper. It was in memory, and memory could never be torn. It was also the small victories that kept him going. The first time Lily reached for his hand without being asked, the way Ellie laughed, really laughed at a silly voice he used during story time, or when all 4 of them helped him bake cookies and left the kitchen covered in flowering giggles. There were long, hard days, but also moments that left Hugh stunned with how much love these girls were capable of despite everything they'd endured. One evening, after a particularly quiet day, Hugh found a drawing taped to his bedroom door. It was crude, made with crayons, but unmistakable. A big man with dark hair and 4 little girls around him, all holding hands. Above it, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Our family." Hugh stared at it for a long time. He didn't move. He didn't speak. Something about those 2 words made him feel both overwhelmed and at peace. For the first time in years, he realized that this was not just a chapter in his life. It was the beginning of something permanent. The paperwork might not be finished, the court hearing still ahead. But in the hearts of those 4 girls, he was already theirs. And quietly, deeply, completely, he felt like they were his too. Summer slowly rolled into the warm, golden days of July, and with it came both progress and unexpected challenges. By now, the girls had settled into a rhythm within the house, one that revolved around small routines: cereal in the morning, afternoon reading in the sunroom, evening walks to the park down the street. Hugh had become more than a caretaker. He was their constant. They looked for him at breakfast, waited for him after baths, and instinctively reached for his hand in public. But underneath the comfort, grief still lived like a shadow in the corners of their joy. It showed up in subtle ways. Hesitation before calling him Dad, sudden mood shifts during holidays, and questions that came out of nowhere, like Mia asking quietly at bedtime, "Do moms forget their kids if they die?" Hugh had no guidebook for these moments. He wanted to tell them the perfect thing to make it all better, but instead he learned the value of listening, of simply being present. That was when he started reaching out more regularly to the girls' child therapist, Dr. Evelyn, who gently suggested that what they needed wasn't perfection. It was honesty and emotional safety. He began having quiet, open talks with each girl separately. He learned that Ellie was afraid the house would one day be empty again. That Grace felt guilty for not remembering her mother's voice. That Lily worried he would get bored of them. That Mia believed love could run out like soap or cereal if you weren't careful. These confessions gutted him, but they also anchored him more deeply in the reality that healing wasn't linear. It wasn't about fixing. It was about holding space. At the same time, something else shifted. People began noticing Hugh's transformation. Friends from his former social circles were curious, but distant. Some congratulated him on his charitable heart, not realizing how insulting that sounded. Others pulled away entirely, unsure what to make of the once ultra-private CEO now hosting Saturday pancake mornings and turning down investor retreats in favor of school fairs. Hugh didn't care. He wasn't interested in approval. What mattered to him now was knowing what cereal each girl liked, which bedtime story soothed whom, and how to braid Lily's hair the way she liked for school picture day. It was during one of the school's summer events, a community picnic in the park, that Hugh met Olivia Warren. She was a reading specialist working with the elementary school and had been assigned to assist kids who had fallen behind in literacy due to trauma or life instability. She was calm, kind, and funny in a quiet way. She didn't seem impressed or intimidated by Hugh's reputation. When he mentioned he was raising 4 girls, she smiled and said, "Then I'd say you've got the hardest and best job in the world." The girls immediately took to her, especially Grace, who had struggled with silent reading, and sat with Olivia under a tree that entire afternoon going through a storybook. Over the next few weeks, Olivia showed up more often. Not in any romantic way at first, just naturally through her work. But every time she visited, Hugh felt something shift inside him. She asked real questions. She talked to the girls with warmth, but without sugarcoating. She noticed when Mia withdrew or when Ellie's hands trembled during reading. And she didn't just help them, she helped him. When one of the girls had a meltdown after a bad dream, Olivia was the one who showed Hugh how to guide her through it, not with solutions, but with presence. One evening, as the sun lowered over the porch and the girls were inside drawing, Hugh sat with Olivia sipping iced tea. She told him a story about a student she'd once worked with who didn't speak for months until the day someone finally read him the same book every day until he memorized it and spoke the words himself. Hugh listened carefully and then said, "You're good at this, at them." Olivia shrugged and replied, "They just need someone to stay." Then she looked at him and added, "And you've stayed. That's rare." That night, after everyone was asleep, Hugh stood in the hallway outside the girls' room, staring at the drawings taped to the wall. One showed 5 stick figures holding hands, for little girls, and a taller man in a blue shirt. But beside him now was another figure, a woman with long hair and a pink dress. It hadn't been there before. He didn't know which of the girls had drawn it, but something about it made his chest ache. He went to bed wondering if it was a mistake to hope for something more. And yet, for the first time since their lives had collided, he allowed himself to imagine what it would like not just to be their father, but to give them a mother again. Not to replace what was lost, but to build something new. Not perfect, but real. The last weeks of summer brought a sense of calm that Hugh hadn't realized he craved. The household, once marked by uncertainty and adjustment, began to move in quiet, comforting rhythms. The girls had started calling the house home without hesitation. They chose their favorite seats at the dinner table, personalized their rooms with drawings and stickers, and developed unique morning rituals. Ellie had to open the curtains first. Grace would hum while brushing her teeth. Lily always fed the cat, and Mia waited by the kitchen island for Hugh to lift her onto the counter so she could help with breakfast. These small patterns were signs that they were beginning to feel safe. Hugh had become their anchor, even if none of them called him Dad just yet. The girls were preparing for the new school year, and the house buzzed with nervous anticipation. Olivia had taken on a larger role in their lives, not formally, not with a label, but with consistency. She was there for school supply shopping, for practice reading sessions, for quiet encouragement when someone didn't feel ready to face the world outside their bubble. Hugh found himself watching her more often, not in a romantic haze, but in quiet awe at how naturally she understood the children, how patient she was with their moods, how gently she could correct without making anyone feel wrong. Olivia didn't try to replace their mother. She stepped into a different role, steady, calm, and quietly transformative. Hugh began inviting her for dinner regularly under the pretense of needing help with school forms or taming the chaos. But the girls were ahead of him. One evening, as they sat around the table eating spaghetti, Grace looked up and asked innocently, "Are you going to marry Olivia?" Hugh nearly choked on his water while Olivia laughed, covering her mouth. Ellie followed up without missing a beat, it's okay if you do. She already tucks us in better than you." Hugh blushed for the first time in years. He glanced at Olivia, who was still smiling, her cheeks pink, but her eyes soft. There was no awkwardness between them, just something warm and open and possible. Later that night, as they cleaned up together in the kitchen, Hugh found himself lingering near her. The house had gone quiet, the girls asleep, the dishwasher humming in the background. He handed her a plate to dry and said, "They love you." "It's not subtle." Olivia looked at him, then down at the dish towel in her hands and replied gently, "And I love them." Her voice caught slightly, and before he could think too much, Hugh asked, "What about me?" The question surprised even him. Olivia looked up again, slowly meeting his eyes. "You," she said, "make this place feel like something people don't want to leave." Nothing more was said that evening, but something between them shifted. The next few days passed with unspoken awareness. Olivia continued to come by, and the girls watched both adults with knowing glances and whispered giggles behind doorways. Mia even started calling her Libby Mom by accident, or maybe not by accident at all. At the same time, the final stage of the adoption process was moving forward. Hugh attended every meeting, filled out every form, answered every question from the court-appointed evaluator. There were home visits, interviews with the girls, financial reviews, character assessments. Every moment was scrutinized. But nothing felt as heavy as the moment he was asked by the judge during a private meeting if he truly understood the lifetime commitment he was making. Hugh responded without hesitation. "They are already my daughters. I'm just waiting for the law to catch up." When the girls found out that the final adoption date had been scheduled, their reactions were unlike anything he had expected. Ellie jumped up and ran in circles. Grace cried, then hugged everyone. Lily made a card that read, "Now we are real." And Mia, quiet as always, handed him a folded drawing. Inside was a house, the five of them, and Olivia, standing beneath a rainbow. Above it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Please stay forever." That night, Hugh sat on the porch alone, the cool air brushing against his skin, the stars sharp in the sky. His heart felt full and aching at the same time. He thought of all the versions of himself that existed before that day outside the bakery. Versions that had no idea how incomplete life had been. Now, even with the exhaustion and the paperwork and the emotional weight of raising 4 traumatized children, he wouldn't trade a second of it. He had found purpose, identity, and something far more valuable than success. And maybe if the timing was right, he was also beginning to find love. Not the kind that rushed in with fireworks, but the kind that built itself slowly from trust and shared moments and the gentle belief that home was no longer a place, but people. The morning of the adoption hearing was warm, clear, and filled with nervous energy. The girls were up earlier than usual, their voices echoing through the house as they dressed in matching white summer dresses with small embroidered flowers chosen days earlier with Olivia's help. Hugh had ironed his shirt 3 times before finally accepting that his hands were trembling too much for the 4th. He wasn't nervous because of uncertainty. The paperwork had been approved, the evaluations complete, and everyone involved had given their blessing. But something about that day felt sacred, like crossing a line that couldn't be undone. And for Hugh, it was overwhelming in the best possible way. Olivia arrived just as they were getting ready to leave. She wore a simple navy blue dress and carried a small bouquet of daisies, 1 flower for each girl. She handed them out as they climbed into the car, and the girls beamed, holding their flowers like treasures. On the way to the courthouse, the mood shifted between excitement and quiet anticipation. Mia leaned against Hugh's arm in the back seat, clutching the small drawing she had made for the judge. Grace was humming to herself. Lily watched the clouds pass by, and Ellie whispered to Olivia about what it would feel like to have a forever name. The courthouse was nothing like the girls had imagined. It was plain and cold inside, but Hugh had arranged for the hearing to be private and gentle. The judge was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s, who greeted each child personally before they sat. Hugh had prepared a letter, one he had written and rewritten for weeks, and he asked if he could read it out loud. With a nod from the judge, he stood, his voice steadier than he expected. "I didn't expect to find my family sitting on a bench outside a bakery one summer morning. I didn't expect to be changed by 4 little girls who looked like they had lost everything but still had room in their hearts to believe in someone new. But I did. From that moment, I wasn't just a man in a suit. I became something else, a listener, a caretaker, a learner, a father. And today, with everything I have and everything I am, I ask this court to give me what those girls gave me first, the chance to belong to them. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The judge asked the girls if they had anything they wanted to say. Ellie stood and simply said, "We choose him." Mia walked up quietly and handed the judge her drawing. It was their family again. Hugh in the middle, the girls around him, and Olivia beside them, holding hands with everyone. When the gavel finally came down and their new names were spoken, something invisible yet powerful settled over the room. They were Lawsons now, not just in heart, but by law. They clapped and cried and laughed all at once. Lily said, "This is what real feels like," and Olivia hugged all four at once while Hugh stood back watching completely full of emotion. Later that evening, back at home, Hugh prepared a simple celebration dinner. Nothing extravagant, just their favorite foods, mac and cheese, strawberry lemonade, and homemade cupcakes with their new last name spelled out in frosting. Olivia stayed to help clean up, but the girls pulled her into the living room for a celebration show where they danced, sang, and shouted their full names like they were winning prizes. At one point, Grace turned to Olivia and asked, "So, are you going to be a Lawson, too?" Everyone stopped. Silence filled the room for a heartbeat. Olivia looked at Hugh and he looked right back. Not surprised, not flustered, just calm and sure. "I'd like that," Olivia answered softly, and the girl squealed so loudly the dog barked from upstairs. Hugh didn't propose that night, but in his heart, he already knew. He had found something bigger than love. He had found family, not because he had planned for it, but because he had chosen to show up, to stay, and to become more than he ever imagined he could be. That night, after the girls had fallen asleep and Olivia had gone home, Hugh sat on the back porch under the stars. He looked up at the sky and whispered, not to anyone in particular, "Thank you." He didn't need anything more than what he had now. But somewhere inside him, he knew there was still more to come. Autumn arrived slowly, painting the trees in gold and crimson, and with it came the gentle deepening of a life that had once felt fragile and uncertain. The Lawson household settled into a rhythm that felt almost like music, predictable, comforting, imperfect in the most human ways. The girls had fully embraced their new surname, proudly signing it on schoolwork and whispering it to new friends like it was a secret too good to keep. Hugh, though still adjusting to a world of parent-teacher conferences, packed lunches, and bedtime negotiations, no longer felt like a visitor in his own life. He was their father, no longer just a title on paper or a role he was growing into. He felt it with every hug, every laugh, every small hand slipped into his as they crossed the street. The transformation wasn't just in the routines. It was in the quiet trust that had blossomed between them. There were still hard days. Ellie continued to struggle with feelings of abandonment. And sometimes her frustration came out in anger she couldn't quite control. Grace's sadness crept in silently at night when the house was dark and her sisters were asleep, and Hugh would often find her staring out the window, lost in thought. Lily's anxiety made her overly careful, needing reassurance that they weren't going to move again or lose someone else. And Mia, though the youngest, carried the heaviest silences. She had stopped asking if love could go away. But she still flinched when voices raised, even in play. Hugh handled these moments not with perfection, but with presence. He sat with them, listened, let them cry when they needed to, and always reminded them again and again that this was their home and no one was leaving. He started writing little notes and tucking them into their lunchboxes. "You are brave. You are loved. You matter." Sometimes they wrote back. Notes slipped into his jacket pockets or taped to his laptop. Childlike scribbles that said things like, "You're the best dad," or "Don't forget snacks today." Meanwhile, Olivia had become a part of their everyday life in a way none of them could imagine reversing. She came over after work to help with homework, stayed for dinners, joined weekend movie nights on the couch. It wasn't always romantic between her and Hugh. Sometimes it was just warm silence, shared responsibility, the quiet joy of not having to do life alone. The girls adored her in a way that wasn't forced. It grew naturally day by day, like vines wrapping gently around a trellis. They began introducing her to others as our Olivia, and occasionally, even without realizing, called her Mom. No one corrected them. Hugh had been thinking about proposing for weeks. He didn't want to rush. He didn't want to do it because it was expected or because it would complete the picture. He wanted to do it because he couldn't imagine the future without her. Because she was already part of their family in every way that mattered. He asked the girls for help and they took their assignment very seriously. Ellie demanded to be involved in the planning. Grace insisted on picking the ring box. Lily started practicing the phrase, "Will you marry us?" until it made Hugh laugh and tear up at the same time. And Mia, ever the quiet observer, drew a picture of Olivia in a white dress, standing with all of them beneath a tree. The proposal happened on a Sunday afternoon just after a walk in the park. Olivia had no idea. The girls led her to a small clearing behind the house where lanterns hung from the trees and a picnic blanket had been spread. Hugh stood waiting, holding a small box in one hand, a bouquet of daisies in the other. The girls ran ahead, shouting, "She's coming." And Hugh felt a nervous excitement he hadn't felt since his 20s. When Olivia arrived, she paused, taking it all in, and smiled with a quiet that said she already understood. Hugh walked toward her, handed her the flowers, and knelt down, not out of tradition, but out of the depth of everything he felt. The girls circled behind him, arms around each other, whispering excitedly. He didn't say anything scripted, just the truth. "You came into our lives gently and suddenly everything felt lighter. I don't know exactly when I fell in love with you, but I do know I never want to do life without you again. You've already been our family. Will you be mine forever?" Olivia, with tears in her eyes, nodded before she could speak. "Yes," she said. "Of course. Yes." The girls rushed forward, hugging both of them, and Lily shouted, "Now we're really real." That night, as the stars appeared above their home, Hugh and Olivia sat on the porch, their hands intertwined, the girls asleep inside. They talked about the wedding, about names and next steps, but mostly they just sat in silence, the kind that's full, not empty. Hugh thought back to the bench in front of the bakery that started it all. And he realized something profound. Love hadn't come to him through ambition or perfect timing. It had come through choosing, through showing up again and again. And now, with the woman he loved beside him and 4 little girls upstairs, dreaming of a future they no longer feared, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a new chapter. This was home. 1 year later, almost to the day, the Lawson family returned to the same bench outside the little bakery where their story had begun. The summer air was warm and soft, a gentle breeze moving through the leaves above them, as if nature itself remembered. The girls, now a year older and taller, wore matching sundresses, not because anyone had planned it that way, but because they had decided it together that morning, giggling and negotiating over colors like sisters who had always known one another. Hugh stood nearby, carrying a small box of cupcakes. He glanced toward Olivia, who was speaking to the bakery owner inside, an older woman who had come to know their story over time, and greeted them now like old friends. The bench looked the same, weathered but sturdy, shaded by the same tree that had cast its dappled light over the 4 little girls who had once sat there clutching a single cupcake. This time there were 5 cupcakes in the box, 1 for each of the girls, 1 for Hugh, and an extra placed gently in the center of the bench. It was their way of honoring the past, of remembering the moment everything changed and the piece of themselves they left behind that day. As they sat down, the girls quieted, a rare moment of shared stillness passing through them. Ellie leaned against Hugh, her hair tucked behind her ears now. Grace held Olivia's hand tightly, swinging their arms back and forth as she hummed to herself. Lily pulled out a small notebook and scribbled something, smiling to herself as she did. Mia, always the quietest, placed the spare cupcake gently on the bench and whispered, "For then." Olivia had officially become Olivia Lawson just 3 months earlier. Their wedding had been small, held in the backyard under lanterns and laughter, with flower crowns made by the girls and vows that spoke more of home than of romance. Hugh hadn't needed to say much during the ceremony. His love for Olivia was evident in everything he did. In the way he watched her laugh, in the way he deferred to her voice when one of the girls had a meltdown, in the way he let himself be softened, shaped, transformed. Olivia, in turn, became the mother the girls had dreamed of, but didn't know they could ask for. She didn't try to take the place of the one they had lost. She simply became what they needed. Comfort, steadiness, light. Over the course of the year, their family life evolved from survival into joy. There were still challenges, still therapy sessions, and moments of sadness that surfaced like waves. But there was laughter, too. Deep, unrestrained, healing laughter that echoed through the walls of their home. Their house, once designed with cool elegance and clean edges, now bore the unmistakable marks of childhood. Paint smudges on the hallway wall, a dent in the staircase from a runaway scooter, stickers on the bathroom mirror, and crayon hearts drawn in places no one could quite bring themselves to erase. Hugh, once a man who lived by precision and control, had learned to let go. He stopped checking emails after 6 p.m., gave up his corner office for a smaller one so he could be closer to home, and no longer measured success by deals closed or projects completed. Instead, he measured it in mornings spent making pancakes in pajamas, in the sound of 4 girls yelling, "Dad," at the same time, in the quiet confidence of knowing that when someone cried in the middle of the night, they came looking for him and trusted he'd be there. As they sat together on the bakery bench, Hugh took a breath and looked at his family. "Do you remember what this place used to feel like?" he asked gently. Grace nodded. "It felt like the end," she said. "But it was actually the beginning," Ellie added. Lily, not looking up from her drawing, said, "It was the start of us." Mia looked up and whispered, "I thought I was invisible that day, but you saw us." Hugh's throat tightened, and Olivia reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently, then stood and pulled something out of his pocket. It was a photo, the first picture ever taken of the 5 of them that first week in his home. They looked so different then, smaller, sadder. But the promise in their eyes had been there even then. He handed it to Mia. "Keep this," he said, "to remember how far we've come." Later that night, they returned home just before sunset. Hugh grilled dinner, Olivia made lemonade, and the girls played barefoot in the yard, chasing each other under the glow of string lights and fading daylight. When the stars came out, they all gathered on a blanket in the grass. Mia fell asleep first, curled against Olivia's side. Ellie recited the names of constellations she'd memorized, while Grace and Lily took turns making up stories about the stars, fairy tales only sisters could invent. And as Hugh sat there watching his family, his heart full in a way he could never have imagined that morning outside the bakery, he realized he no longer thought of his life in before and after. There was only now, only this. The girls weren't just saved from something. They had built something new together. A home made of second chances, found love, and the quiet miracle of being seen. And as Hugh looked up at the sky, his wife beside him and his daughters all around, he smiled and thought, this is what forever feels like. As the author of this story on Millionaire in Love, I believe the ending represents something that quietly but powerfully challenges what we expect from tales of loss and healing. It's not about rescuing someone or being rescued. It's about choosing each other when no one else did. Hugh didn't step in as a savior. He became a father because he allowed his heart to be broken open by the simplest, most human truth, that love is built, not bought. The girls, despite all they'd been through, didn't lose their ability to hope. That hope is the soul of this story. Olivia's presence doesn't just complete the family. It symbolizes grace, patience, and the idea that love isn't always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and shows up one day after another. In the end, what makes this story powerful is not the transformation of a man into a father or the happy family photo. It's the emotional truth that healing takes time, but it's possible when people choose to stay. The bench, the cupcake, the whisper of "we have no family." These were seeds. What grew from them was something rare, tender, and real. A family built not by blood, but by choice.